Now, here's a good one. What can Marxism contribute to our modern day world? By Arni.
It can contribute Venezuela, and it has. So I'll be a little bit less cynical in my answer, but we've seen what it can contribute. I don't know how many bloody times we have to run the experiment. No, that wasn't real Marxism. I know what that means. I know what that sentence means. What that means is, well, if I was the dictator, with my profound understanding of Marx's real intent, and my universal benevolent compassion, uncontaminated by any proclivity towards darkness or sin, I would bring on the socialist utopia. That's what it means, fundamentally. And if someone says that and claims it, then you should get the hell away from them as fast as you possibly can. Okay, so Marx was concerned about inequality, and there are reasons to be concerned about inequality. But the problem with Marxism is that it lays the cause of equality at the feet of the fundamental institutions of the West. The free market, democracy, capitalism, patriarchy, the hated word. Inequality is not caused by the institutions of the West. That's wrong. Inequality is the fundamental rule of existence. And it's produced, the thing about the Western systems, every system we know produces inequality when it's run as an operative process. All of the systems produce inequality. What we've developed in the West is the only system that produces wealth along with the inequality. And you might say, well, the wealth isn't equally distributed. It's like, that's true, hence the inequality. But at least there's some wealth. You know, the number of people in absolute poverty in the world halved between 2000 and 2012. 3 years faster than the UN was hoping for in its most wildly optimistic projections. People are getting comparatively richer at an absolute level with unbelievable speed. It's never been seen in the entire history of the planet. You know, first it happened in the West, obviously, including to Iceland, and even in the last, 75 years here, there's been an unbelievable increase in the standard of living, and now it's starting to happen everywhere else. The fastest growing economies in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa. That's a hell of a good deal. There's no starvation in China. There's no starvation in India. And in the places in the world where there still is starvation, it's because of political reasons. It's not because there isn't enough food. It's because one group of people sets out to starve another group of people to death. It's not a matter of absolute privation.
Or because of Marxism.
Well, yes, or because of Marxism, right. I think the average Venezuelan has lost something like 17 pounds. You know, it's awful. It's absolutely awful. So I don't think that Marxism has a damn thing. I think Marxism has already contributed enough millions of corpses to have finished with its contributions, personally.
But isn't Marxism dangerous because it has its appeal, and its appeal comes from grains of truth that it uses and tries to stretch across and explain all of reality?
The Marxists point to the pernicious problem of inequality. And inequality is a problem. Inequality is a problem. I mean, I outlined that in part in 12 Rules for Life. The reason there's a left wing, and the reason there should be a left wing, is because inequality is a problem. It has to be addressed. And when you set up a hierarchical structure, which you need to if you're going to pursue things of value, then the hierarchy tends to ossify and become rigid, and it becomes hard for people at the bottom to climb to the top, and so they get dispossessed, and that can become permanent. That's a bad thing. It's everyone's problem. Left wing, centrist, right wing, doesn't matter. Inequality is a problem. But that doesn't mean that you can lay it at the feet of the institutions of the West. And that's where Marxism goes wrong. And it also doesn't mean that we know how to fix inequality. It's really a hard problem. And so it's a much harder problem than people think. Now, we don't know what to do about it. We've done some things, and you know, our cultures vary. The Scandinavian countries tend to be a little bit more on the income redistribution side, and that seems to have worked reasonably well. I mean, the Scandinavian countries are pretty damn livable. They've got their problems, particularly Sweden, as far as I can tell, but But it's easier for homogenous small countries to do redistribution, by all appearances. It's not so easy for a place like the United States, which is much bigger and much more diverse and has a much broader range of problems. And so the Western countries are stumbling through. Some of them have steeper hierarchies and less of a social safety net, like the US, although it's incredibly productive and tends to have very low levels of unemployment. And then there's places like the Scandinavian countries where the social, and Canada, where the social safety net is more well developed, but that struggle with improving productivity and with higher rates of unemployment, most of the countries. So we don't know how to get that right, but we're kind of muddling through it, and at the same time we're muddling through it, almost all of us are getting absolutely richer, and so that's a pretty good default position to be in when you're trying to sort out the inequality problem. And you know, I've been thinking over the last weeks that there are, you know, you can express these problems in quasi-mathematical form. It's like there's probably a rule that's something like, in order to produce one increment of absolute wealth, you have to allow 3 increments of inequality, or something like that. Inequality is the price you pay for the generation of wealth. And I suspect, because the right amount of inequality is not 0. It's some number. And you could debate about what that number is, but it's not 0. You flatten everyone out, you get nothing.
But if you have a meritocracy of some sort, then if you're producing something to get to the top, you're producing something for others.
Well, the thing is that the radical types don't believe that, they don't believe that there's anything but power. They don't, like another thing that really annoys me about the universities and this doctrine that I've been combating, let's say, is that your argument is predicated on the idea that there's such a thing as merit, that there's such a thing as things worth doing. And the real radical types would debate that. They'd just say, well, you're just using the idea of meritocracy to justify your position in the patriarchal tyranny. And you might say, well, no, I'm not. And they would say, you're just a mouthpiece for your group privilege. There isn't any you. Don't make that mistake. There's no you. You're just an avatar for your privilege.